9:14 a.m. October 12th, 2023. Kings County Surrogate's Court, Brooklyn, New York. The first sound was not the judge's voice. It was a laugh, small, contained, but sharp enough to leave a mark. It came from the petitioner's table, where Helena Ashford sat in a cream suit with a silk scarf folded neatly at the throat, the kind of outfit chosen for sympathy, not sorrow. Beside her, her son Nathaniel lowered his eyes too late to hide the smirk on his face. Their attorney, Victor Sloan, did not correct either of them. He only rose, smoothed one immaculate sleeve, and stood with the relaxed posture of a man who had spent his whole life being paid to turn cruelty into procedure. Across the aisle, Daniel Ashford sat beneath the state seal in a black wheelchair, hands resting lightly on the armrests, expression unreadable. 31 years old, only child of the late Samuel Ashford, the legal heir if the will held, a problem if it did not. Victor opened a leather folder and stepped into the center of the room. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter." It never was. He turned just enough to let the gallery see Daniel without appearing to point. "My clients are here because the late Samuel Ashford's final trust amendments, estate directives, and corporate control instruments were executed under deeply questionable circumstances while he was in severe medical decline and while under the exclusive influence of a dependent beneficiary with obvious motive." Dependent beneficiary. He said it so smoothly it barely sounded like an insult. But the insult landed anyway. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, one ankle over the opposite knee, and looked at Daniel with the easy contempt of someone who had never confused inheritance with entitlement, because he had always believed the two were the same thing. Helena lowered her gaze and folded her hands. She looked wounded, carefully wounded. The performance had already begun. Daniel did not react. That was the first thing that felt wrong, because people being humiliated in court usually reveal something: a flinch, a tightening jaw, a pulse in the throat, some sign that the damage is getting in. Daniel Ashford looked like a man waiting for a door to open. Judge Evelyn Mercer noticed it. She noticed, too, that Daniel's lawyer did not object. Asha Bennett sat beside him in a charcoal suit, one yellow legal pad in front of her, expression so composed it bordered on cold. Victor continued. "The estate at issue is not modest. This is not a disputed savings account or a family house. Samuel Ashford controlled maritime holdings, port leases, real estate, trust-backed securities, voting interests, and a private family office with multi-state assets. The court is being asked to believe that such a man placed every controlling instrument into the hands of an individual with no executive title, limited physical independence, and unrestricted emotional access. Limited physical independence. Another polished knife. The courtroom absorbed it. The gallery did what galleries often do when wealth and disability collide in the same room. It leaned toward the wrong assumption." Judge Mercer said nothing. Victor smiled slightly at the bench. "My clients are not here out of malice. They are here out of duty. They believe Samuel Ashford's final decisions were the result of isolation, pressure, and undue influence." Across the room, Daniel kept his eyes on the judge. Not defiant, not pleading, just steady, almost patient. As if the worst thing happening in that room was not what Victor was saying, but how slowly it was taking. Victor called his first witness, Dr. Leonard Pike, private neurologist, paid expert, the kind of witness wealthy families love because he could make prejudice sound clinical. He adjusted his glasses, took the oath, and settled into his seat with the practiced solemnity of a man used to being introduced as neutral while saying exactly what he had been hired to say. "Doctor," Victor began, "based on your review of the decedent's medical records, what was Samuel Ashford's condition in the final months of his life?" "Compromised," Dr. Pike said. "He had suffered a stroke. He exhibited periods of fatigue, memory fluctuation, reduced stamina, and increasing dependence on close caregivers. Victor nodded. Would such a patient be vulnerable to suggestion? Yes. Especially from someone with constant physical access? Yes. Especially from an emotionally central family member? Yes. That answer spread quietly through the room. Victor let it breathe. He did not rush. That was what made him dangerous. He understood that poison works best when it is allowed to look like patience. Asha Bennett did not stand. No objection, no interruption. Daniel did not move. Helena watched from the petitioner's table with the pained expression of a woman pretending she took no pleasure in what was being done for her benefit. The next witness was Samuel's former house manager, then a private nurse, then a driver. Each one described the same shape from a different angle. Daniel was always there. Daniel screened calls. Daniel managed schedules. Daniel carried documents in and out of the study. Daniel limited visits when Samuel was tired. Daniel sat in on meetings. Daniel answered questions before others could. It was careful work. No one accused him directly of stealing. No one needed to. The implication was more elegant than accusation. How convenient that the disabled son was always the last person in the room. By the time Helena took the stand, the court had already begun to settle around her version of events. She gave her name softly. Her voice trembled in exactly the right places. My late brother-in-law was a proud man, she said. Samuel was strong, private, difficult, yes, but never confused about his business. Then after the stroke, he changed. He withdrew. He became increasingly dependent on Daniel for everything. Everything. The word was almost gentle. That made it crueler. And the rest of us, Helena continued, glancing down as though shame kept her from speaking plainly, were gradually shut out. Nathaniel looked down, hiding another smile. Judge Mercer saw it. She also saw Daniel's hands, still calm. Too calm. Victor approached the witness box like a man arranging a final hymn. Mrs. Ashford, in your view, was Samuel isolated in his final weeks? Yes. Was access to him controlled? Yes. Did Daniel control that access? Yes. Did Samuel ever personally explain why every significant instrument of power was transferred to Daniel alone? Helena paused. Then, no. Victor turned toward the judge and allowed the silence to do his work for him. No further questions. Asha stood. She approached without notes, no folder, no visible urgency. That made Helena uneasy almost immediately. Mrs. Ashford, Asha said, you loved Samuel like family? Of course. You visited him often? Yes. In the final month of his life? Yes. How many times? Helena hesitated. Victor's head turned slightly. Several, she said. Asha waited. No rescue came. How many? Helena swallowed. Twice. Twice? Asha let the number sit in the room. Are you aware that the court has residential security logs from the Ashford estate? Victor rose. Objection. Counsel is testifying. I'll rephrase, Asha said without turning. Mrs. Ashford, would you be surprised to learn those logs show only one visit in the final month? Helena's face changed by less than an inch. It was enough. I may be mistaken on the number. Would you also be surprised, Asha continued, to learn that visit lasted 11 minutes? Victor was already on his feet. Objection. Judge Mercer kept her eyes on Helena. Overruled. Answer the question. I don't remember the exact duration. Of course. Asha took one more step. When you say Daniel controlled access, are you referring to the same Daniel who was listed in Samuel Ashford's written medical directive as primary proxy? Helena's throat moved. Yes. And the same Daniel authorized in writing by Samuel to screen non-essential visitors during periods of fatigue? Yes? No further questions. The crack was small, but real. Victor moved quickly to repair it. He introduced emails, board correspondence, transfer notices filed by Daniel after Samuel's death, emergency asset freezes, blocked family distributions, temporary signatory holds. On paper, it looked brutal, fast, predatory. Exactly what the petitioners needed it to look like. Victor stood at the evidence screen and lowered his voice into something almost sorrowful. The respondent acted within 48 hours of death to seize operational control, suspend family distributions, restrict account access, and remove senior personnel. He turned toward Daniel. Does that sound like grief, Your Honor? Helena lowered her head. Nathaniel no longer bothered hiding his satisfaction. And Daniel? Daniel sat there like stone, not ashamed, not frightened, waiting. That was when the clerk hurried toward the bench with a sealed envelope. No one noticed at first. Then Judge Mercer glanced down, read the handwriting, looked again. Something in her face shifted, not dramatically. She was too disciplined for that. But her neutrality thinned. Victor was still speaking, still presenting, still framing. Until he realized the judge was no longer listening to him. He stopped. The courtroom followed her gaze. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, sealed with dark red wax and marked in sharp blue ink, to be opened by the court only if Daniel Ashford is challenged. Below that, by instruction of Samuel Gregory Ashford. The room went quiet all at once, the kind of silence that does not belong to shock yet. Only possibility. Judge Mercer rested the envelope on the bench and touched it once with 2 fingers. "Counsel," she said, voice lower now, "it appears this court has received material from the decedent expressly conditioned upon the filing of this petition." Nathaniel sat up. Helena's face drained of color for a moment before she recovered it. Victor turned so quickly it almost looked like fear. Daniel did not move at all. Judge Mercer looked from the envelope to Daniel and back again. Then she said, "Before we proceed further, I want the record to reflect the language on the seal." The clerk leaned forward and read it aloud. No one breathed, and Daniel, who had been underestimated from the moment he entered the room, lowered his eyes for one brief second, like a man hearing a long-promised knock finally arrive at the door. This is a fictional dramatization created for storytelling and entertainment. It is not a real case, and it is not legal advice. If you enjoy courtroom stories where arrogance enters first and truth shuts the room down later, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And while this case unfolds, let me know where you're watching from tonight. Samuel Ashford had not been an easy man to love. That was the first truth. He was admired more often than he was embraced. He respected more often than he was understood, feared, quietly, by people who used the word formidable in public and impossible in private. He built Ashford Maritime Holdings from one leased warehouse, 2 aging freight trucks, and a stack of unpaid invoices after the death of his wife, Eleanor. While other men drowned grief in liquor or gambling or younger women, Samuel drowned his in logistics. He turned mourning into schedules, silence into leverage, absence into industry. By 50, he owned routes. By 60, terminals. By 70, enough of the East Coast freight chain that bankers changed their tone when his assistant connected the call. And through all of it, Samuel remained exactly what success had sharpened him into: precise, hard, impatient with charm, unmoved by excuses. The one exception in his life was Daniel. Daniel had not grown up sheltered. He had grown up observed. After a highway collision at 16 left him with permanent spinal damage, people changed around him. Their language softened and their expectations narrowed at the same speed. Teachers praised him for showing up. Family friends called him inspiring, when they could no longer imagine him powerful. Strangers looked at Samuel with pity, as if the father had inherited a grief that the son himself was expected to carry politely. Samuel hated all of it. He hated the sympathy more than the damage. He hated the way rooms looked past Daniel's face and landed on the chair like it was the only thing that required explanation. And he hated what it revealed in the family. Before the accident, Helena had spoken to Daniel like future bloodline. After the accident, she spoke to him like delicate memory. Nathaniel, younger then, and already spoiled by proximity to wealth, absorbed the change instantly. He learned the family's unspoken lesson without ever being taught it aloud. Daniel was still loved, but differently, safely, as someone adjacent to power, not central to it. That mistake would eventually ruin them. As Daniel grew older, he developed the kind of stillness that unsettles people who mistake noise for authority. He watched more than he spoke. He learned balance sheets the way other young men learned small talk. He sat beside Samuel during late-night reviews of port contracts, freight insurance disputes, and expansion financing structures, until numbers stopped looking abstract and started looking like behavior. That impressed Samuel, not because Daniel was his son, because Daniel saw patterns. He noticed who flattered, who delayed, who over-explained, who asked for revisions when they should have asked for permission. He noticed who became suddenly affectionate whenever trust structures came up over dinner. He noticed Nathaniel's interest in the family office long before Nathaniel had earned any right to be there. Helena had married Samuel's younger brother, Richard, a man with polished manners and no discipline. Richard preferred inheritance to labor and debt to embarrassment. When he died, Helena kept the Ashford name, the townhouse, the jewelry, and the instinct of drifting close to wealth whenever grief made a family disorganized. Nathaniel inherited something worse than his father's weakness. He inherited assumption. He grew up believing the Ashford empire was not something built, but something owed. He spoke about the family's future before he had ever managed a payroll. He joined strategy dinners uninvited, asked trust questions with the false casualness of a man pretending curiosity while measuring windows. Samuel saw all of it, said little. That was another thing people misunderstood about him. They thought silence meant uncertainty. It rarely did. Usually it meant he was still calculating how much rope to leave in someone's hand. When Samuel's stroke came, the family changed shape around him almost immediately. Not in public. Publicly, there were flowers, statements, soft concern, expensive casseroles no one intended him to eat. Privately, there were calls, meetings, quiet legal inquiries framed as prudent contingency planning. Helena asked the family office about trustee succession timing. Nathaniel scheduled lunch with two board members Samuel had never fully trusted and called it an informal continuity discussion. A private banker began exploring what temporary support structures might look like if Daniel was not suited to high-level control. That was the phrase they preferred. Not suited. People like Helena and Nathaniel never liked saying disabled when there was a softer phrase available to do the same harm. Samuel noticed the movement almost at once. So did Daniel. In the final year of Samuel's life, as rehabilitation narrowed his world and fatigue made his afternoons shorter, father and son began speaking more directly than they ever had before. There was less posturing now, less hardness for its own sake. Illness has a way of making pretense expensive. One evening, in the library overlooking the river, Samuel had asked Daniel to read out a set of shipping forecasts. Daniel did. Then Samuel set the papers aside and said without looking at him, "They've already started." Daniel did not ask who. He already knew. Samuel nodded once. "Good. That means you're paying attention." Another pause. Rain dragged itself down the windows. "You know what they think?" Samuel said. Daniel answered, Yes. They think I'll die confused? Yes. They think you'll be too decent to stop them. Daniel looked at the ledger open in front of him. They may be wrong about one of those. Samuel almost smiled. Almost. From that point on, the work changed. It stopped being theoretical. Samuel revised trust language, updated proxies, rewrote distribution controls, inserted contest-triggered forfeiture clauses so carefully that 3 separate firms reviewed the drafting, and all 3 reached the same conclusion. It was severe, but valid. Daniel did not ask to be made controlling trustee. He did not ask for the waterfront properties. He did not ask for voting rights. He did not ask for the townhouse Helena lived in to remain trust-owned. Samuel designed those terms himself, with the cold discipline of a man building one final firewall after deciding exactly who would eventually test it. At the same time, he began documenting what the family did not know he had seen. Requests for unsigned drafts, attempts to access restricted folders, conversations with external advisors about Daniel's capacity, irregular consulting fees routed through shell entities linked to a trust management service Nathaniel had quietly begun using. Nothing explosive at first, just small movements. The kind of small movements wealthy people always assume no one will bother assembling into a full picture. Daniel saw enough of it to understand what his father was preparing for. Samuel saw enough to understand what Daniel would eventually have to survive. 3 nights before the end, when the room smelled faintly of antiseptic and the nurse had just stepped out, Samuel asked Daniel to close the study door. Daniel did. Samuel was pale, thinner than the rest of the world ever saw him, but his eyes were painfully clear. "If they grieve," he said, "leave them alone." Daniel stood beside the desk and waited. "If they challenge," Samuel continued, "let them finish the job." Daniel's jaw tightened once, not in fear, in understanding. Samuel studied him. "You don't need to beat them," he said. "You only need to remain where I put you." That was not comfort. Not exactly. It was trust. And from Samuel Ashford, that was the closest thing to tenderness most people ever received. When Samuel died, Helena arrived with black gloves and softened eyes. Nathaniel arrived in a dark suit, already checking messages between condolences. Victor Sloan was retained before the funeral flowers had fully wilted. Daniel knew what that meant. That was why he froze discretionary trust distributions within 48 hours. That was why he suspended access to selected accounts. And that was why 2 senior officers suddenly found themselves removed from internal systems before dawn. From the outside, it looked cold. Daniel allowed it to look cold because the people moving against him were counting on hesitation. They were counting on grief to soften him. They were counting on the fact that disabled sons are supposed to be brave in a harmless way. He gave them none of that. Back in court, after the envelope appeared, Judge Mercer ordered a short recess before addressing it. The gallery dissolved into whispers immediately. Helena did not rise. She stayed seated, posture rigid enough to crack. Nathaniel leaned toward Victor with sudden urgency. For the first time all morning, his confidence looked borrowed instead of natural. Victor listened, jaw tight, and then glanced across the aisle at Daniel. What irritated him most visibly was not the envelope. It was Daniel's face. No satisfaction, no nerves, no visible hope. Just the same impossible composure. Asha Bennett bent slightly toward him. "Still all right?" she asked. Daniel kept his gaze on the courtroom clock. "I was all right before they filed." She nodded once. That was all. No pep talk, no theatrical reassurance. When court resumed, Victor made a decision that would later look less like strategy and more like vanity. He did not ask for the sealed material to be opened immediately. Instead, he pressed forward. as if momentum itself could bury whatever was waiting inside. That was his mistake. He called Marjorie Ellis, former compliance officer at Ashford Maritime. Mo Kroll, a careful woman with the tired posture of someone who had spent too many years cleaning elegant messes created by men who considered ethics a scheduling inconvenience. Victor was gentle with her. Ms. Ellis, in the final 6 months of Samuel Ashford's life, did you observe Daniel Ashford exercising unusual influence over business matters? She hesitated. A dangerous thing to do under oath. Daniel was involved in more discussions, she said. More than would be expected from someone without a formal executive title? Yes. Did he instruct you to limit the flow of certain internal memos to Helena and Nathaniel Ashford? Asha rose. Objection. Compound. Sustained. Victor nodded. Did Daniel ever direct you to restrict family access to selected business information? Yes. The gallery stirred again. Victor moved toward the evidence monitor. And after Samuel's death, did Daniel suspend expected discretionary disbursements? Yes. Was that normal transition practice? No. Victor let the answer sit there like blood in water. Then Asha stood. Ms. Ellis, she said, who did compliance report to in the last 6 months of Samuel Ashford's life? Samuel directly. And if Samuel was unavailable? Daniel. So Daniel's access was authorized? Yes. By whom? Samuel? Asha nodded. You said Daniel limited selected family access. Did he invent that authority himself or follow written instruction? Marjorie looked down. Written instruction? Signed by whom? Samuel. Dated over what period? Several months. Victor stood, leading. Judge Mercer never looked at him. Overruled. Asha took one more step. When Daniel suspended discretionary disbursements after Samuel's death, was there an active internal review concerning irregular transfers? Marjorie's voice lowered. Yes. Potentially involving entities connected to Nathaniel Ashford? Victor was on his feet before the name fully landed. Objection. Judge Mercer leaned forward. Answer the question. Marjorie closed her eyes for the briefest second. Yes? Nathaniel's face changed, not into guilt, into offense. Exposure offended him more than accusation. Asha returned to counsel table without another question. She did not need one. The room had started shifting under the case, and everyone could feel it, even if they didn't yet know where it would settle. Victor tried to regain control by calling Samuel's home nurse, Elaine Mercer, no relation to the judge. Soft voice. Middle-aged. Plain cardigan. The kind of witness juries love and lawyers weaponize. Elaine testified that Daniel was constantly present in Samuel's final weeks, that Samuel often deferred to him when tired, that Helena had once been turned away because the decedent was resting, that calls from certain family members were not always returned quickly. To anyone already leaning toward suspicion, it sounded ugly. Control dressed as care, possession dressed as devotion. When Asha rose, even the judge seemed to expect a full dismantling. Instead, she asked 4 questions. Ms. Mercer, did Samuel Ashford ever appear afraid of his son? No. Did he ever suggest Daniel was coercing him? No. In his final week, did Samuel know what day it was? Yes. Did he know exactly who he wanted in the room? Elaine answered without hesitation. Always. No further questions. Again that pattern. Daniel's side was not contesting every bruise. It was letting them accumulate, letting Victor become comfortable, letting the petitioners keep mistaking temporary momentum for control. By late afternoon, Judge Mercer finally turned to the sealed envelope. The room contracted. Helena sat straighter. Nathaniel's fingers closed around the arm of his chair. Victor rose. Your Honor, before any such materials are reviewed, We request authentication, chain of custody, and full opportunity to object to relevance and prejudice. Of course, Judge Mercer said, but something in her voice had changed. Distance. The envelope was logged, the seal photographed, the handwriting entered into the record. Inside were 3 items: a signed letter, a flash drive, and a smaller folded sheet marked "Read only after video playback." The gallery went so quiet it almost felt staged. Judge Mercer read the first page, silently. Her expression changed, slowly, but unmistakably. Asha saw it, Daniel saw it, Victor saw it, and for the first time all day, he looked like a man discovering that confidence does not always survive contact with the dead. Judge Mercer looked up. "Counsel," she said, "the court will admit the letter provisionally pending full authentication. The accompanying media will now be reviewed in open court." Victor objected. Of course he did. But objections sound different when they arrive half a heartbeat too late. Judge Mercer nodded once to the clerk. "So play the file." The screen lit up. Static first. Then a room everyone in the Ashford family recognized instantly. Samuel's private library, dark wood, river light through high windows, a green banker's lamp, the brass clock that had never once kept perfect time. And there, seated upright in a navy robe with a blanket over his knees, was Samuel Ashford. Thinner than the courtroom had expected him to look, paler-skinned, frailer. But his eyes were painfully alive. The dead man looked directly into the camera, and the living forgot how to breathe. "My name is Samuel Gregory Ashford," he said, voice roughened by illness, but unmistakably his. "If this recording is being played in court, then Helena and Nathaniel have done exactly what I expected." No one moved. Even the court reporter seemed to pause before her fingers found the keys again. Samuel continued, "I am making this statement voluntarily, in the presence of independent counsel, licensed witnesses, and forensic verification. I am of sound mind. If anyone says otherwise, they are lying, uninformed, or arrived too late to matter." Nathaniel's mouth opened slightly. Victor did not move. Samuel lifted a folder resting on his lap. "To the court. Daniel did not manipulate me. Daniel warned me." There it was, not a defense, a reversal. Samuel opened the folder. Tabbed documents appeared on the screen beside him as he spoke. Transfer records, internal review notes, account maps, entity diagrams. The precision was almost cruel. "I began documenting attempted interference, unauthorized financial probing, wine and pressure campaigns concerning my estate 11 months before this recording. Those efforts came primarily through Helena Ashford, Nathaniel Ashford, and professionals retained or influenced on their behalf." Nathaniel half rose. Victor gripped his sleeve and yanked him back down. Samuel's eyes sharpened. "I also instructed Daniel to preserve logs, delay responses, restrict selected access, and allow certain parties to continue underestimating him. Not because he required protection, because they required exposure." The room changed shape around that sentence. Judge Mercer never looked away from the screen. Helena had gone white beneath makeup. Samuel held up another page. "If this challenge has been filed, then Appendix 9 of the Ashford Master Trust activates immediately." Silence. Not suspense now. Recognition. Samuel went slower, making sure every word reached exactly who it was meant for. "Any beneficiary who contests Daniel Ashford's authority as controlling trustee forfeits all present and future distributions under the family trust, all occupancy rights in trust-owned residences, and all indirect benefits secured through holding companies linked to this estate." Helena's hand lifted slowly to her throat. Nathaniel whispered, "No." Not loudly. like a man speaking to the first crack in ice. Samuel turned another page. "For the avoidance of doubt," he said, "the Brooklyn townhouse currently occupied by Helena Ashford is trust property. The coastal investment interest leveraged by Nathaniel Ashford for personal credit facilities is trust-backed. This challenge triggers review, suspension, and recovery." The room did not gasp. It froze. Because people expect wills to divide money. They do not expect them to become traps. Samuel looked straight into the camera. To Helena, performance is not loyalty. To Nathaniel, inheritance is not entitlement. To both of you, illness is not an opening. Nathaniel's face seemed to lose structure. Helena shut her eyes. Samuel continued, merciless now. "I did not leave control to Daniel because he is fragile. I left it to him because he is the only one in this family who never treated my decline like a vacancy." Then the final blow. If they are hearing this, they have already destroyed themselves. Daniel will not need to defeat them. He will only need to remain where I put him. The video ended. No music, no dramatic flourish. Just the soft digital click of a file closing and a dead man finishing the work of judgment he had begun in life. Judge Mercer opened the folded note marked for later, read it silently. Her face changed again. Then she looked at Daniel in a way that altered the room without explaining why. Victor recovered first, or tried to. "Your Honor," he said, voice tighter now, "even if the recording is authentic, it does not excuse post-death fiduciary conduct. Nor does it immunize the respondent from scrutiny of his own actions as trustee." It was a clever argument. Smaller than before, that mattered. Judge Mercer said, "Proceed." Victor did, but the room no longer belonged to him. He pivoted to technical exposure, fiduciary timing, corporate risk, market sensitivity, lender reaction. And he needed Daniel to look reckless now that manipulation was dead as a theory. For a while, it almost worked. He introduced lender correspondence showing that Daniel's account restrictions had triggered review notices. He showed internal memos from frightened executives. He emphasized that Daniel had dismissed 2 senior officers without board consultation. Bad optics, dangerous optics. And Daniel remained exactly what he had been all day. Calm. That calm irritated people, which was useful, because irritation makes arrogant people speak more than strategy would prefer. Victor finally called Daniel to the stand. The entire courtroom tightened. Daniel wheeled himself forward without assistance, took the oath, settled beneath the witness light. Victor smiled, but it was thinner now. Careful. "Mr. Ashford, you expected that recording to exist." "Yes." "You knew your father had planned for litigation." "Yes." "And yet you never disclosed the recording before today." "No." "Why not?" "Because he instructed me not to." Victor spread his hands. "How convenient." Daniel said nothing. Victor shifted. "You froze assets within 48 hours of death." "Yes." "You removed officers." "Yes." "You blocked family distributions." "Yes." "You anticipated this challenge." "Yes." "Because you intended to consolidate power before anyone could stop you." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then, "Because money was already moving." Victor's jaw shifted. "Moving where?" "Out." "Out of what?" "The estate, the company. Places it shouldn't." "Did you report this alleged theft to law enforcement?" "Not immediately." "Why not?" Daniel's gaze flicked once toward Judge Mercer, then back. "Because my father wanted the challenge filed first." Victor's tone sharpened. "Why would any rational man want his family to sue his disabled son after his death?" Daniel answered in the same tone he might have used to comment on rain. "Because then the forfeiture would activate." The courtroom went still again. Nathaniel gripped the edge of the table so hard the tendon stood white in his wrist. Victor leaned in. "So you admit this was a trap?" Daniel did not blink. "No, it was a choice. They made it." Victor tried another route. "You considered yourself qualified to run Ashford Maritime Holdings?" "No." That answer surprised everyone. Native Victor caught it and lunged. "No?" Daniel's voice stayed level. "I considered myself obligated." A beat. The room leaned in. "I did not need to be the smartest person in the company," Daniel said. "I needed to be the one least willing to steal from it." Victor held still. That line was too clean to attack directly. So he went lower. "Mr. Ashford, do you deny that your physical limitations affect your ability to manage a complex corporate structure?" Asha stood. "Objection." Judge Mercer's voice was ice, sustained. Victor nodded as if chastened, but the damage he wanted had already been attempted. Daniel turned his head very slightly toward the judge, then back to Victor, not offended, not rattled, simply aware. Victor changed tone. "Let's be practical. Ashford Maritime operates around the clock. Ports, shipping delays, labor disputes, emergency negotiation, lender relations, international exposure. Do you truly believe you can handle that scale alone?" Daniel answered, "I don't." Victor smiled thinly. "And yet you insisted on sole control." "No," Daniel said. "My father insisted on sole authority. Control is what people call it when they're angry they lost access." The gallery shifted. Someone in the back actually exhaled aloud. Victor hated lines like that because they sounded natural and landed permanent. He tried one final angle. "You suspended trust distributions to Helena Ashford immediately after Samuel's death. Why?" Daniel's answer came without delay. "Because her office had already attempted to obtain draft instruments before burial." Victor blinked. "Do you have proof of that?" Asha stood. "Your Honor, the defense would like to admit Exhibit 52, a metadata log, an access request trail from the family office server. 2 attempts, time-stamped. One at 11:08 p.m. the night Samuel died, another the following morning." Victor objected. Judge Mercer overruled. Nathaniel leaned toward his mother. "Say something." Helena did not. Her face had gone brittle. Asha Bennett rose for redirect. "Daniel, did you ask your father to leave you the company?" "No." "Did you ask him to trigger forfeiture if the trust was challenged?" "No." "Did you ever ask him to cut Helena or Nathaniel off?" "No." "What did you ask him for?" Daniel's eyes lowered once. Not in weakness, in memory. "Time," he said. When he still had it. Asha sat down. That answer moved through the courtroom more quietly than any dramatic line would have. Because it was true. And truth usually arrives without performance. Then came the accountant, court-appointed, unimpressed by family pain, social standing, or inherited surnames. She testified that 3 consulting entities receiving unusual disbursements in the 6 months before Samuel's death shared administrative infrastructure with a trust management vehicle linked to Nathaniel. Victor objected. Foundation, prejudice, scope, all proper, all futile. Then came digital records, entry logs, email chains, draft requests, call metadata showing repeated after-hours contacts between Helena's office and one of the dismissed senior officers. A picture emerged the way ugly pictures always do, not in one explosion, in accumulation. 1,000 small dishonesties assembling themselves into a face no one could deny anymore. Nathaniel cracked first, not with confession, with entitlement. He stood up despite Victor's warning. "This is insane," he snapped. He was supposed to step in temporarily. Every head turned toward him. Not because of the volume, because of the word. Supposed. Judge Mercer's face changed. "Mr. Ashford," she said, voice colder than before, "sit down." But Nathaniel had already heard himself too late. Victor hissed his name. Helena reached for his sleeve. He jerked away. Daniel watched him with the stillness of a man seeing a mask finally refuse to stay in place. Nathaniel pointed across the aisle. "He can't run that company alone." Daniel said nothing. Nathaniel laughed once, brittle and furious. "This whole thing was built on pity." That was the last mistake. Not because it was cruel, because it was honest. The room heard it. The judge heard it. And Daniel, for the first time that day, let a visible emotion cross his face. Not anger, recognition. As if something ugly he had known for years had finally introduced itself in public under oath. Helena tried to recover the family's dignity by asking permission to clarify. Judge Mercer allowed it. Helena returned to the stand looking older now, not from time, but from exposure. Her carefully practiced sorrow had collapsed into strain. "We were trying to protect the company," she said. Judge Mercer asked, "From whom?" Helena hesitated, already the wrong answer. "From instability." "Define instability." Helena glanced toward Daniel and made the mistake of thinking implication would save her. A man in his condition managing everything without oversight. Judge Mercer cut her off. "His condition," she repeated. No one moved. The judge's voice stayed level, which made it devastating. "This court has heard a full day of arguments dressed as fiduciary concern. What it has repeatedly encountered beneath them is not evidence of incapacity, but contempt." Helena stared. Judge Mercer continued, "You did not object when Samuel Ashford appointed Daniel proxy. You did not object when he assigned him restricted authority while alive. You objected when death made that authority final." Helena's lips parted. No sound came out. That was the courtroom shifting, not emotionally now, structurally. Power had moved. Victor heard it too. He tried to narrow the damage in closing. Even if Samuel intended Daniel to inherit, was Daniel prudent? Even if forfeiture was triggered, should the court exercise equitable restraint? Even if Nathaniel's conduct was ugly, should one man retain unchecked authority over a complex enterprise? It was smart lawyering. Too late, but smart. Asha's closing was quieter. She stood beside Daniel and spoke like someone explaining something simple to people who had complicated it on purpose. "This case was filed in the language of protection," she said. But protection for whom? Not Samuel Ashford, who documented his wishes with exhausting clarity. Not the company, which faced irregular transfers from people now pleading concern. And certainly not Daniel Ashford, who was expected to surrender authority the moment it became uncomfortable for others to imagine competence inside a disabled body. She turned slightly toward the petitioners. They did not come to court because they were uncertain. They came because they were offended. Offended that the person they had reduced to an inconvenience was, in fact, the final decision-maker. She let the words settle. Then the last line. "They mistook his stillness for dependence. They mistook his disability for absence, and they mistook proximity to family wealth for a right to inherit power." Then she sat. Judge Mercer took a long time before delivering the ruling. Long enough for Helena's hands to begin trembling visibly. Long enough for Nathaniel's anger to collapse into something hollower. Long enough for Victor to stop rearranging papers he already knew would not save his clients. Long enough for Daniel to become, once again, the calmest person in the room. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was procedural at first, then final. "The petition to invalidate the Ashford Trust amendments, estate directives, and related testamentary instruments is denied in full." Helena shut her eyes. Nathaniel stared ahead. Judge Mercer continued. This court finds that Samuel Gregory Ashford acted with full legal intent and sufficient capacity, that Daniel Ashford did not exert undue influence, and that the petitioner's challenge activates the forfeiture provisions expressly incorporated into Appendix 9 of the Ashford Master Trust. No one in the room seemed to remember how to breathe. The court further affirms Daniel Ashford as lawful controlling trustee, sole authorized executor of the challenged instruments, and proper decision-maker regarding transitional governance at Ashford Maritime Holdings. Victor lowered his head. He knew what came next before she said it. Occupancy review is to begin immediately for trust-owned residential property presently used by Helena Ashford. All distributions to contesting beneficiaries are suspended pending final accounting. Records concerning the irregular transfers identified in these proceedings are referred to the appropriate authorities for civil review and, if warranted, criminal investigation. Nathaniel made a sound then. Not a word. A human sound. Disbelief, stripped of posture. Judge Mercer looked at Daniel one last time before bringing down the gavel. This court will not treat disability as a loophole through which greed may pass, disguised as concern. The gavel fell once. That was all. One strike, no applause, no triumph. Just the clean, administrative sound of arrogance, losing legal protection all at once. Helena sat very still after that, as if movement itself might confirm the ruling was real. Nathaniel looked around the room with the bewildered anger of someone waiting for adulthood to arrive and undo the consequences on his behalf. Victor closed his folder carefully. Professionals always close their folders carefully at the end of disasters. It was the last courtesy they could still control. Daniel did not smile. He did not lean back. He did not offer the courtroom the performance of vindication. Asha gathered her papers in silence. The gallery began to stir. Court officers moved. The clerk called the next matter, and at the center of it all, Daniel turned his chair toward the aisle. Judge Mercer was still watching him. Not with pity, not with admiration either. Something cleaner than that. Recognition. She had watched a room full of people try to shrink a man into an assumption and fail under the weight of their own certainty. Daniel gave the smallest nod toward the bench. Respect. Nothing more. Then he wheeled forward between the benches, past the people who had spent the day talking around him, through him, over him, and out through the courtroom doors, with the same quiet he had carried in. Only now the room understood what that quiet had been. Not weakness, not passivity, not fear, evidence. And by the time everyone else realized what was coming, that evidence had already become a verdict.